Subscribe to Stories, click the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. I wasn't supposed to be there that night. Not in that apartment, not on that couch, and definitely not in that moment. But what if the place you swore you'd never return to becomes the exact spot where your heart starts beating again? Life has this strange way of pulling you into the very places you swore you'd never go again. It bends your carefully drawn lines, shatters your expectations, and leaves you standing in the wreckage of your own plans, wondering where you went wrong. I used to think my life was mapped out, neat, predictable, safe. I believed love was something steady, a promise made once and kept forever. But sometimes love doesn't end with a fight. Sometimes it ends in silence. A kind of silence so deep you start to forget what your own laughter sounds like. When he left, he didn't even have the courage to say goodbye. 5 years together. And all I got was a note taped to the fridge. A scribbled half-hearted apology that meant nothing. A house key tossed on the counter like I was just a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I remember standing there staring at that key. It looked harmless, just cold metal catching the kitchen light. But the longer I stared, the more it cut into my palm until I couldn't tell whether the pain came from the sharp edge or from the realization that everything I had built was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't the kind of silence that soothes. It was the kind that screams, that makes your chest heavy and your thoughts too loud to ignore. That's when I called Carrie, my best friend since childhood. She was the kind of person who could hear your heart break in the way you said hello. Before I could explain, she interrupted me gently. Pack a bag. You're staying with me tonight. She didn't ask what happened. She just knew. That's the kind of friend Carrie was. The kind who didn't need all the details to show up for you. I agreed before she even finished her sentence. Because right then, escape felt like oxygen. I didn't want to stay in that apartment another second, surrounded by reminders of what used to be. Carrie's place was different. A tall old building at the edge of the downtown district. The kind that looked like it had seen 100 stories before ours. Brick walls, high ceilings, sunlight that spilled through wide windows like it was trying to paint over the past. Even in silence, that place felt alive. When I arrived, Carrie hugged me tight and said, "You'll have the apartment to yourself for a bit. Nathan's away for work." Nathan, her older brother. I remembered him vaguely, the quiet one at school gatherings. The musician who'd rather sit with his guitar than mingle with the crowd. Back then, he always seemed distant, like someone who lived half in his own world. So, when Carrie mentioned he wouldn't be around, I felt relieved. I needed solitude, not company, a place to grieve without being seen. For 2 days, I barely spoke. I lived like a ghost in Carrie's apartment, drinking coffee I couldn't taste, watching time dissolve through the window. Then one night, a door creaked open, and everything I thought I needed changed forever. Then on the third evening, the front door creaked open. I froze. Footsteps echoed softly across the hallway. Slow, steady, familiar. Nathan, he wasn't the boy I remembered. He had grown into a man who carried silence differently. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was depth. His hair was messy. The kind of messy that looked unintentional, but somehow deliberate. A gray t-shirt, joggers, and a calm energy that filled the space without asking for permission. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod, polite, unassuming, just enough acknowledgement to remind me that I wasn't invisible. "Hey," he said simply. His voice was low, warm. I managed a soft hi, and that was it. Our first conversation after years, 2 syllables floating awkwardly between us. The next few days blurred together. We barely spoke. A polite smile in the kitchen. A quiet thanks when passing the remote. 2 people pretending not to notice each other, yet always aware of the other's presence. That suited me just fine. I didn't want connection. I wanted stillness, to breathe, to recover, to disappear into my own silence. But silence doesn't stay empty for long. One evening, I couldn't bear the walls anymore. I slipped out for a walk. The autumn air bit at my cheeks, and the city hummed softly under flickering street lights. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, whispering secrets only the lonely could hear. When I came back, the apartment smelled faintly of rosemary and red wine. Nathan was there, reclined on the couch, one ankle propped on his knee, a half-empty bottle breathing quietly on the table. The TV glowed against the walls. A romantic comedy. Notting Hill. I smiled, surprised. You like this movie? I teased, setting my keys down. He glanced up, the corner of his mouth tugging into a faint grin. Only when I'm depressed, he said. I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in weeks, 2 glasses were already poured. He didn't invite me to join, but he didn't have to. I sat at the other end of the couch. Not close, but not far. The movie filled the silence between us. Familiar lines, soft laughter, the kind of comfort that sneaks up on you when you're not looking. When Julia Roberts whispered, "I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy," asking him to love her. I felt his gaze shift toward me, just for a heartbeat. No words, no movement. But in that brief glance, something inside me moved. That moment became a quiet beginning. Days slipped into weeks. The apartment settled into a rhythm. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, turning the brick walls gold. I started to recognize the sound of Nathan's footsteps. Steady, unhurried, the kind that brought a strange sense of peace. We fell into small rituals, sharing coffee in the morning, passing notes about groceries, watching movies in the quiet of the night. Our conversations were simple, but beneath the simplicity, something unspoken hummed. That it wasn't love. Not yet. It was something softer, like warmth in winter. A presence that reminded you life could still feel gentle. One night, I couldn't sleep. The clock blinked 2:47 a.m. I wandered into the living room barefoot, wrapped in an oversized shirt. Nathan was there, sitting in the dim blue light of his phone, his features carved by shadow, his eyes distant but calm. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. I shook my head. "You too." He put the phone aside and patted the couch. Wordless invitation. I hesitated, then sat. We didn't speak at first. The quiet was heavy, but not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that listens. The city murmured faintly through the window. Cars in the distance, the hum of the refrigerator, our breathing in sync. Then Nathan asked, "Do you miss him?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at the floor, tracing invisible patterns on the rug. "I don't know," I said. "Sometimes I wonder if I ever really had him." Nathan turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "Maybe it's a good thing he's gone." There was no pity in his voice, just truth. And that truth hit harder than any comfort could. I looked at him for a long time, searching for something, maybe judgment, maybe understanding. But what I found was neither, just calm certainty like he had seen people break and rebuild before and knew it was possible. I think I started slowly. I'm more afraid of being wanted than being alone. Nathan inhaled sharply like he hadn't expected that answer. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel, you've always been wanted. You just never noticed." The words hit me like a quiet explosion. Something inside me cracked open. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the world had shrunk down to just the two of us. His hand rested near mine, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his warmth. And before I could think, before my mind could protest, my heart leaned forward. That night changed everything. Not because of what happened, but because of what it revealed. Grief has a way of turning you into a stranger to yourself. But that night, sitting beside someone who saw through my silence, I started to remember who I was before the heartbreak. Nathan didn't try to fix me. He didn't promise anything. He just saw me, not as the broken version, but as the woman underneath all that pain. And sometimes that's enough to begin again. The days after that were quiet, but different. Every glance carried weight. Every shared moment lingered a little longer than it should. When he brushed past me in the kitchen, my skin remembered. When he smiled across the room, my heart did something it hadn't done in months. It hoped. We never talked about that night. Didn't need to. Some things are too delicate for words. One morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, I caught him watching me make coffee. He smiled faintly and said, "You look more like yourself today." I didn't ask what he meant because I knew grief had stopped being my identity. It was just a shadow now. Something that followed me but no longer defined me. And Nathan, he had become the quiet proof that healing doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the warmth of shared space, in the comfort of being seen. Weeks later, Carrie returned home. The moment she saw us together, the way we moved around each other so easily. She smiled knowingly, but said nothing. One evening, as I packed to leave, Nathan leaned against the doorway. "So, back to your place?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said. "It's time." He nodded. No drama, no declarations, just understanding. But as I turned to go, he added quietly, "Don't disappear again, Rachel." I smiled. "I'm not planning to." That night, walking out of that apartment, I realized something profound. Sometimes healing doesn't look like moving on. It looks like standing still long enough for the right person to find you in your silence. Nathan wasn't my plan. He wasn't part of the story I thought I was living. But maybe he was the unexpected chapter one needed all along. Because sometimes the people who enter quietly leave the loudest echoes in our lives. If you've ever found yourself rebuilding after heartbreak, remember this. You don't need to rush the healing. You don't need to have it all figured out. Sometimes all you need is a place to rest, a little silence, and someone who sees the person you're still becoming. Thank you for watching Stories. If this story touched you, hit the like button, subscribe to Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who helped you find yourself again without even trying? Because sometimes the quietest people become the loudest part of your healing.